Oh, hi there, it's Paulie here. So I'm just kind of starting a series of tea talks because the channel was founded on doing reviews of games, and games reviews from the point of view not only of sort of a player that's been there from kind of for 50 odd years playing these things, but also from a professional designer's point of view. And then I threw in the anecdotes, tales of gamerdom and fandom, and they've been fun. But I've been getting a lot of viewer questions about technical aspects of things of games play and games design, and what do I think about games like this? How do I think games? So, hey, let's do some tea talk about some of these subjects. Indeed, I have, Russian Caravan tea, because I love it. It's dark, smoky, evil. And Mr. Snoot says hi. Yay! So one of the earliest ones I had was a question about the different editions of Dungeons and Dragons and what they all mean. Okay. So let's give this a shot. So Dungeons and Dragons comes out in 1974. Now, if you go through some of my review videos, you'll find there was a process to that. There was a game called Braunstein, which had come from a Napoleonics miniatures campaign. But the umpire decided, let's do a break from maneuvering mighty armies and let's try a new thing where everyone is going to run a character, a single person. And these guys will have, aims and goals that they're trying to achieve. And we'll kind of freeform it a bit, but we're going to put terrain down, make a town, and you'll have your little written thing of the aims and goals for your character. You can move it around, you can find people, talk to them if you bump to their character, maybe get together, go on a mission. So some of these guys, it was still in a Napoleonic kind of setting initially, because it's the break in their campaign. But maybe some of you got a spy mission. Maybe some of you are just trying to keep this place going. Maybe some of you are resistance against the French who've occupied it. Maybe some of you are trying to smuggle stuff out of town. You've got little things to do. Maybe you're trying to keep the peace in the town. Maybe you're the police. Maybe you're the French intelligence service. And this thing was such a hit that it became an ongoing thing. Dave Arneson was a player. Down the road, we've got Chainmail being made, which is a skirmish game for it's actually a medieval army combat system, but not massively huge in scale. And it could boil down to some cool kind of man-to-man and skirmish kind of stuff. And there's starting to be some questions asked amongst that group. Hey, if we have repeat games and we have individuals, because they had heroes and these sorts of things, and kind of our Lord of the Rings fantasy addenda to the rules that let you do elves and orcs and tree ents and so on. It's like, but if you have characters that come back, do they get better? Do we have experience? Can these guys get more butch if they don't get killed in a battle? Do they get way better as leaders and so on? So Gygax is starting to work on that, and Arneson and so on. So you got to come down. We'll play this amazing Braunstein thing, and that's where this whole idea of what if there's a game with an integrated rules system, and we take this idea of running individual characters, and thus role-playing games as we know it starts to be born. So their first iteration is Dungeons and Dragons. I have my original set here still. They are little brown books, A5 size. These originally came in a wooden box, a little brown wooden box. Later on, a little white cardboard box. There were essentially 3 core books in this set. There was Men and Magic, which is how to create characters, and it's got a magic system and spells and so on. Then there's Monsters and Treasure, which is a book on monster stats and treasures and magical items and things like that. And then there's Wilderness and Adventures. There's another one at the end on essentially how to run a game. These came with some little dice and so on. But this game can still be run, and it has a great deal of charm to it. It's a beautiful game, and this is the game I started playing. And this came into all of the war games clubs, because these guys put out lots of war games rules. They were a little indie war games publisher who did cool stuff. I used to play their English Civil War rules. The TSR English Civil War rules were a riot. I have a sad obsession with English Civil War, because, hats with feathers and, armor and cuirassiers and woo! But so the basis of this is it has rules in it that allows you to roll this over into the chainmail combat system, because they're very obsessed with the idea of being able to switch between the larger military game and the more personal role-playing game with individual characters. Its wargames roots are very, very strong. And there is a play style that goes with this called Gamist, which I'll explain in a moment. But we have the genesis of what you will still recognize in D&D today. There are classes for characters, and you can't really move outside of that class. So there are fighting men. This is guys who specialize in waving a sword or halberd or or firing a bow. They are physical fighters. They wear armor. They have weapons. There are magic users. These are guys who use magic, and they are the only ones that really cast mighty offensive magic. And wizards, sorcerers, whatever you want to call them, they cast spells. Then they have clerics in there, which is a very interesting class initially. It's essentially a fighter. They limit his weapons a bit. And after he goes up his first level, a cleric gets access to spells. A cleric does not start with spells in the original game. So those are essentially your core 3 classes, but races are classes. So they put in hobbits because the Tolkien estate had not yet seized them. So a hobbit, well, it can do some fighty kind of stuff, but it's quite good at sneaking around and hiding. They got dwarves. Dwarves are kind of a fightery class, but here's some special stuff that they can do, which is different to humans. And then they have elves, and elves, essentially, they've decided, well, you can either be like an elven magic-using sort or a mighty elven warrior. You can be both, but at the start of any game session, you have to decide which one you're playing as. And if you're playing as a sorcerer, then you have to follow the magic user rules for this session. And if you're playing as a fighter, you have to follow the fighting men rules for this session. All hit dice are done on a d6. Fighters, I think, just get an extra +1 at first level, and they get, so there's a minor difference between what the fighters get. They do get like just a little +1 here and there. So it's not a huge gap between them and the hit points of anyone else. No one penalizes the magic users, which I like. And there's some things that are now canon. They're actually not in those original rules. So there is actually nothing in the original base rules that say a magic user can't wear armor. There's some kind of badly worded things that imply that they can't wear magic armor, but nothing says they can't wear like normal everyday armor. And likewise, clerics, it says, well, they can only really use blunted weapons like maces and so on. But here's the thing, it makes no difference. Because in those rules, all weapons did the same damage. It's like it does, and all weapons do a d6 damage. We house ruled this pretty quickly. In the case of the games groups I was in, what we said was, if it's a big weapon, like a two-handed weapon, we'll let you roll twice and choose the highest. If it's a light weapon, like a quarterstaff or a dagger, you will roll twice and take the lowest. That was our house rule. Other groups said, oh, big weapon, you're going to roll a d6 +1, and a dagger, you're going to roll a d6 -1, although it can't get lower than 1 point. Take your pick. But these were the house rules there. These rules had a list of spells for the both the clerics and the magic users, and in these are the core spells that still exist today that you will recognize. Sleep, magic missile, magic mouth, these kind of things are all in there. The healing spell for cure light wounds for clerics, bless. These kind of things are all in there. So this game allowed you to play some amazing things. Now, it's very enabling because no one's hyper specialized so that everyone can do things. Everyone can look for traps. Everyone can look for secret doors. Everyone can listen at doors. You've all got the same charts that anyone else has. So because there's no one class that's hyper specialized at these things. No one else is disadvantaged and told, well, you can't do those things anymore. And it did establish that system in the bits of advice on play in how to run the adventures. It tells you it's more about what people say they're doing. So if you say they walk into a room, there's some bookshelves and there's a statue over in the corner, etc. And if the player then says, my character is going to search the bookshelf, I want to see if there's a secret door operated from it, or if there's any interesting books in the shelf. Right, that takes you some time, but if there is anything there, you just find it. You don't make a roll. The guy said he's searching the bookcase. He's an intelligent person or a dedicated adventurer. He's looking for stuff. He'll find it. So if levering that third book down from the left does, you pull on it and it opens a secret door in the wall over there, then that will happen. You find that. Or if, well, these are all ordinary books, except for this one in the middle that's, bound in human skin and has a snarling face on the cover. Okay, you find it because you told them to. There's no abstract rolls. There's no skill system, and there's no system for rolling against characteristics to see if you can do something. You get some very, very minor additions if you have high characteristics. All characteristics are the ones that we recognize. Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. They were all there. If you're up in the kind of 16 to 18 bracket, you get a little +1 on some things, but not for every characteristic. So this whole thing of characteristics giving you bonuses wasn't much of a bonus, but what you did get was you got a bonus to the experience you earned if you had good scores in the core characteristic for that class. So if a fighter is strong, if a magic user is intelligent, if a cleric is wise, if a hobbit is dexterous, they get a bonus to the experience that they earn, 5% bonus, I think. So, you will go up in levels a little bit faster. Okay, fair enough. So, that's a strange and unusual thing. And of course, everyone house ruled different ways of doing that. If you needed to know if you could pick something up or, run faster than someone, often you just look at it, well, I'm charisma 16 and everyone else is about charisma 8. So, I'm the one that's going to step forward and, talk to the Grand Duke or something. It kind of came in role-playing wise. Perfectly playable game. The core monsters that we recognize there, the important ones, the only ones you really need to play, they're all there. Lizard men and kobolds and orcs and, treants and pegasi and, ochre jellies and black puddings and so on. They're all in there with some very charming self-done illustrations. These rules remain the main ones in play for actually many years. Now, some supplements came out for these. First one was actually Blackmore, I think. So this is Dave Arneson's campaign, really written up as another one of these little books. And it brought in some additional kind of rules, but it was a way of showing you how to take something beyond sort of a dungeon adventure or a hex crawl. And because the cross-country adventure side of the games, they were telling you just use an Avalon Hill board game that was out at the time. For outdoor exploring, just use that. Okay. Well, Dave Arneson's thing sort of showed you maybe you can not have to buy a board game to play this. We can show you how to set up kingdoms and do things. Greyhawk was actually the most important supplement that came out. Lovely little book. And that brought out some interesting things. So suddenly we've got thieves appear as characters between these two books. And so that's, a character class that can pick open locks and is good at disarming traps and can climb walls and these sorts of things. All right, fair enough, but it can't wear heavy armor and etc. For reasons I'll never forgive. What was hot on TV at that time? Kung Fu. So someone's obviously said, hey, can I be a Kung Fu guy? All right, well, I put some rules in there for monks, a Kung Fu guy, a character class nobody needs in a medieval fantasy, but oh well, they put it in. But they also brought in some variants for the hit dice of characters. All right, so that's where you start to get different hit dice types used for the different characters. So fighters get a D8, and the wizards and the thieves and the clerics all get lesser dice cascading down from there. They also put in different characteristics for weapons. There's a chart in there for weapons. They will do different dice. A longsword will do a D8. A halberd or a two-handed sword will do a D10. A dagger will do a D4. A mace will do a D6. That's all in there. And some of these, they decided, let's give different weapons bonuses against different sorts of armor class. A mace is quite good at bashing up something that's in chainmail. Pole arms and heavy two-handed things are quite good at getting through heavier armors, so they'll get a bonus against the heavy armors. So okay, they're trying to put more tactical variants into their game. Then they bring out Gods, Demigods and Heroes, which is a book showing you how you could kind of bring gods into the campaign a bit. It wasn't really important, but it did bring in some ridiculous high-level magic items, the artifacts, the dreaded Hand of Vecna, the Eye of Vecna, all these sorts of things, which are legendary things, obviously from Gygax's games and so on. This little group, the 3 initial books, the Blackmoor, Greyhawk, and Gods, Demigods, and Heroes, this is the original canon books. And Judges Guild starts up, and it brings out its first published adventures. So it brings out things like City State of the Invincible Overlord. It brings out Teagle Manor, still my favourite module of all time. Thieves of the Fortress, Badabaskor, all these different things. It's basically this Greyhawk enhanced original D&D that these are done for. Now, the company decides to start doing a couple of things. And there's some interpersonal politics with Gygax and the other designers that I won't go into. There are other people that have gone into them, but essentially, there was some falling outs amongst people, and Gygax started to get a few slightly shady ideas, and TSR kind of takes off as a corporate entity on its own, etc. Gygax decides he's going to work on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, a way more complicated version of Dungeons & Dragons, which has massively expanded rules. That's going to take a while. Meanwhile, they decide they're going to bring out, as a bridging gap, basic Dungeons & Dragons. And this is the Mighty Blue Book that many people remember, and many of my viewers probably started with basic. It came out in a little box, and it was a system that basically could guide your character through first to, I think, 3rd level. Later on, they then brought out Expert, which did 4th level onwards. And that was, you'll see that kind of shorthanded as B/X, Basic and Expert, which is a thing that is still played today. It has its adherents, and here's why. BX was very clearly written because they realized they're going to get young players. This isn't a game just for experienced wargamers anymore. They're getting a lot of teenagers wanting to play. So it has to be easily written. It can't be, the original rules were a little bit impenetrable because they were written by wargamers for wargamers. So they're very well written. They're very clear. They lay things out way more clearly. And what they do is they start to bring in some interesting ideas. So for one thing is you've got those core classes, so fighter, magic user, cleric and thief. They have moved away, I believe, from doing races as character classes. And what they're saying is you can play pretty much anything you want to play, by the way. They're very enabling rules. So they say, if you want to play a baby dragon, just discuss it with the umpire. How is this going to be done? You're obviously going to start off as a little baby one because the game is set up so that you start out quite weak and simple, and you, through experience, you become better as you go along. In fact, dragons are a good one because they already had a system set up so that dragons have a set number of hit dice, and the older they get, is the more that they've actually got as score per hit dice for their total hit points. So a baby dragon has 1 point per hit dice. So if you're a green dragon or something that has 9 hit dice, well, you'll have 9 hit points at your starting level. Fantastic. I, in fact, did play a dragon in a very early campaign. Had the time of my life. I was just flapping around, and I was mapping places, and I was selling maps to other players. They want to know how to find, the Lost Island of Zaz. Oh, we're looking for it. So I've got my own adventures as I'm exploring stuff and making maps, so these guys can go and find whatever the hell it is they're looking for. Great fun. But so this had the different character classes enshrined in there, but it kept things quite simple and neat and clear. It had a slightly more expanded set of charts for gaining bonuses from characteristics. It did have differentiation between the weapons, maybe not as crazily as Greyhawk, but yes, here we go. Here's our equipment list. Your longsword does this. Your scimitar does that. Your flail does this. So it is a simplified, beautifully expressed version of the original rules with differentiated hit dice really between the character classes, and it had everything you needed. The Advanced Dungeons & Dragons products began to come out, but the first thing that came out was the Monster Manual, a blue-covered hardback monster manual, which was formatted in such a way that, yes, you can play it with BX or with original D&D. It was beautiful, and I still use it. It's beautiful. It's got everything you need in it. Lovely. The artwork was fun, and this was the first hint of what AD&D was going to be, but it was a working product that you could use without whatever these AD&D rules were going to be. So BX has its adherents today because it is robust, clear, simple, has everything you need, but doesn't have all these massive layers of rules for tons of things. It keeps things very theatre of the mind and very open, doesn't snow you under with detail. Speaking of snowing you under with detail, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. So, the next publications that come out, AD&D, is how you'll see this shorthanded. So, you get a player's manual, and then later on, we came out with the DM's Guide, the Dungeon Master's Guide. One of the most unnecessary books in history, but there it was. But the player's manual, big book, and this builds on basic. Now, the hit dice for the characters has changed. Used to be a fighter as a D8, and I think the cleric was a D6, the magic user and the thief were both D4s in hit dice. Now, fighters are a D10, clerics are a D8, magic users, magic users are a D4, and thieves then move to a D6. Okay, so, all right, more of a range, some experience in play, some people just complaining that this character class is a bit weak, etc., etc., etc. So, now the magic and everything is different. I have to say, by the way, in the original D&D, what happened is when a magic user gets to a new level, you had a chance of knowing new spells based on your intelligence, and you just rolled down the whole list of spells, and it just told you which ones that you learned or did not learn, and you could never roll again. So if you had a 75% chance of knowing new spells, when you got to a level where new spells were available, you immediately rolled down the list, and it's like, yep, I know that one, that one, that one. I failed at that one and can never know it. That one, that one, that one, that one. So in advanced D&D and everything, this is done somewhat differently. You don't sort of have this hard line where you just can't learn some things. So you have that variance, and now in the character hit dice and so on, it's very precise on what equipment each character class can use. Each character class has its own charts for advancement, for experience, etc. There's considerably more detail on bonuses and sometimes penalties for characteristics. So if you've got a high dexterity, you're good at firing missiles, and you can increase your armor class and these kind of things. Clerics now get spells from word go. which is thank you. You know, that's useful. In fact, clerics can get more than one spell if they've got high wisdom. They can get bonus spells, which is great because their spells aren't quite as decisive as the magic users, so you need more of them. And a thing from these earlier D&D iterations is magic users kind of, as you get into basic and advanced, they get pretty clear about the fact that magic users use this Vancian magic style where you have a certain number of spells you can throw a day. You have the spells that you know that are in your spell book. You pre-book which ones you're going to put into your head. So if you can use 2 first level spells a day and that's it, and you know 5 different spells, you might know magic missiles and sleep and whatever. You might decide, all right, I'm going to learn to be able to cast today. I'm going to put sleep and magic missile in my head. I can't change what I've got in my head, and if I don't use them, just tomorrow I can load different ones. But you have to pre-book what you're going to do, whereas clerics didn't have to. They had a list of spells that they knew, and they could kind of omni ad hoc kind of channel them. So again, they were flexible but less decisive. But a lot of their stuff was designed to help the party. Gives you bonuses to hit, helps protect you from monsters, heals your wounds, can see a little bit into the future and tell you through augury if this is a good or bad idea you're about to embark on. They're very useful guys to have around, and they're still a really good sort of fighter as well. Where it went into hilarity was a giant list of weapons. They decided, let's really expand on Greyhawk and everything. Let's do the weapons, but let's do lots of weapons. Let's get the Stone's Guide to Weaponry, which weapons historians just called Stone's Bible. It's a thing this thick, and it has every weapon in the universe. Every obscure Sudanese sword or African dagger is in this thing. But they went through all the medieval ones, and they kind of put this down there, and they decided to give them different characteristics. So against every armor class, everything's got different bonuses to hit, and they've got different damage, and they do different damage versus large creatures like a horse versus a man-sized creature, sometimes versus a small creature, and there's little footnotes on them. So these ones do extra damage if you set them against a charge. So these ones do extra damage if you charge with them. These ones can do but the hilarity of it was they tried to cover all of these different polearms. And so the polearms, you've got, this is a glaive, this is a guisarme, this is a glaive guisarme. What? This is a ranseur. This is a military fork. This is a billhook. This is a fork fouchard. This is a fork fouchard, glaive guisarme fouchard fork. It was just, and what it usually boiled down to is it did a dice 8 damage and, had a 7-foot reach. Way more spells. Way more spells. Obviously, coming from all their playing, and way more equipment. Variants with some hilarious loopholes in it. So for instance, you could buy chickens for probably less than buying some eggs, and then you could use the chickens to produce eggs which you could sell for way more than the cost of a chicken. Or the wineskin scam where you could buy wine, like a gallon of wine for this much, and you could buy an empty wine skin for this much, or you could buy a gallon of wine in the wineskin, which cost exactly the same, which meant the wineskin came for free. So what you could do is buy masses of wine in the free wineskins, squeeze the wine out into a barrel, sell the wine separately, and now you've got all these other wine skins which you can sell for profit. So you're basically earning twice as much if you buy this stuff and then sell the constituent parts. Little things that gamers are great little shits at finding out, but whatever, house rule it. But this game, again, pretty robust game. Tons and tons and tons of rules for everything. So if you want to know how much it costs to build a galley or to hire hirelings or build a castle, whatever, it's starting to be in there. Out comes the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is just filled with masses of stuff. Now, the thing everyone wanted it for was it was going to have more extensive treasures lists in it, and it has. It's got all the magic items and so on that you can find in there, and all the treasure lists. So that was good. But it's also full of tons of advice on how to run the game and how to run kingdoms and how to set up things and so on. Some of it, great. Some of it, unnecessary. Some of it, ridiculous rule micromanaging. because we're starting to go from this sort of gamist to simulationist style. I'll do a video on different game styles, but in essence, the first game has come from war games, so these things are still being played a bit like a skirmish war game. So there's very hard rules about when characters drop dead, but it's just presumed you'll just roll up a new character and who cares. So rolling up characters is pretty simple. There's not much emotional investment in them. You just make them. But as this game started to get more complex, people are investing in their characters and they want the story of the character. They're more interested in it. So advanced D&D, it's much harder to die. It used to be when you got to 0 hit points, you die. But in advanced D&D, you can get to -10 before you die. If you get to 0, you're unconscious, your character drops down, and then you lose some damage each round that goes past until it either stabilizes you randomly or someone comes up and basically says, I'm binding their wounds, I'm doing first aid, in which case it stops them and you can heal them back again with magic and so on. So, so it's harder to have a character drop dead on you because people want these characters to go in and improve. So it's moving away from an elaborated war game to become a thing that's about stories and character more. But with that has come this strange desire to try and give you all the tools you need to simulate that game world in more depth. So it's full of kind of tailored rules that are almost unnecessary for figuring out river traffic or how to tame a griffin, how to feed and care for any mercenary troops that you should hire, how to get good quality buildings made, how to commission magic items to be created, what happens to the quality if you rush them, and all these sorts of things which aren't really necessary, but they come up in a game and they decide they'll cover them, or they've decided it might come up in a game and we'll cover it. Okay, so that is first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and this thing dominated through the 80s. Great game, great fun, and backwardly compatible with everything else that had been published for D&D, so it's just easy. You can still run all of the early adventures that were done for the previous systems, because the monsters were still kind of the same, and because the monster hit dice had you were now rolling d8s and so on for these, they were commensurate with the hit dice of fighters, so the balance remained the same. So great, very clever. No one has to republish anything. Second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now that came out, the game's kind of flagging a bit. They wanted to give it a shot in the arm, so they kind of brought out a new edition. The core rules are essentially the same. They brought out in some silly damn formats, like they figured you'd put them into ring binders and all these sorts of things. But they decided to increase the sort of options that are available to people. So a hallmark of second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons are skills, language slots, and character options. So each character has a list of weapon slots, basically. These are the weapons that you can take. And everyone gets like an array of these things. So, my fighter can take, I'm going to be able to use lance and sword and mace and whatever. But what you could do is cross off some of these slots for other skills, they decided. So, but I'm going to actually I'm going to learn bow and sword, maybe dagger, but I'm going to use some of these slots to learn other things. I'm going to learn to be a sailor because I want to be a mighty pirate. So I'm going to use these slots to take like navigation and ship captain, or I'm going to use these things to do politics and whatever. You can start to build skills into the character. All right, so so they're allowing you to make more options for the character. But then what they did is they brought out a series of booklets for each character class, which gave you actual almost like subclasses for the class. Also, more classes are starting to appear. First coming out through the magazines, which they'd always been doing. People have always been putting out cool extra classes. So you'll find many different iterations at these early things of people trying to do like bard and druid classes particularly. That seems to be something people were obsessed with, but there are many others. My favourite, The Man Beast from White Dwarf, issue 8. I love it, I love it, I love it. And it stars in my book, The Dungeoneers, my latest novel, in fact. But, so what you would get are these books. And say, for instance, you had the Fighter's book. It would give you a series of different options you could try taking as a fighter. For one thing, it would expand weapons, and it would do something like give you some optional rules that your table might feel like doing, for tactics, and it might do a rundown on cool ways of using fighters in combat, and some extra things you might want to think of. And then it would have these other classes. So, all right, well, here's a knight. Here's a like a cavalier, someone who specializes in fighting from horseback. He gets bonuses on horseback, etc. Here's a samurai. Here's a primitive kind of warrior, someone who's like more in touch with the wilderness and tracking and all these sorts of things. Here's something that's more like a backstreet kind of thug. So you've got these kind of different variations that you might want to take, and the equipment. And each of these has got special rules that go with them, special powers that they can do, special things that they can do. So, okay, and it really was worth looking through these. There's one I really liked actually in the Bard class, wackily enough. They went through Bard stuff, and they had one which was a was it jongleur? I think it was a jongleur, but essentially that's sort of the minstrel knight. So officially you're a bard, but what you are is a knight bard. So you're a knightly guy, plate armor, lances. You could joust and do all these sorts of things, but you're also kind of the lute strumming romancer. So you're kind of romancing women, and you could be a bit of a Don Juan or a bit of a a pure-hearted lover if you wished. And so that's the kind of Arthurian romance knight as a bard subclass. So these were really interesting, and often could be sometimes problematic for a umpire who's trying to mesh some of these crazy ideas. All right, so your Arthurian knight jongleur has just decided to hook up with a samurai and a witch doctor to form a party. Okay, all right. So you're sitting in a tavern. They kept on with this idea of more and more and more options, and different classes sort of became canon. But you got this thing called the player's options, which was on the surface of a good idea, where again, a new book for each class, and I'm showing you how we remove all of the special powers of each of these classes. And by that I mean like the bonuses to hit for fighters, the fact that they can specialize in weapons, and what armor that your class can wear, what weapons your thing can use, etc. And we assign points values to these, and then we give you a budget of points, and then you design your character class yourself by picking and spending these points on what abilities and things that you have. And so you can swap some things around. So for instance, what if you wanted a fighter, but you wanted to limit yourself to not having heavy armor? I can only have light armor, so I only spend this much points on that. So I can spend the points I've saved on buying other abilities, and some of those are abilities taken from other classes or special ones they've got in here. So you can kind of tailor make a thing. I want to be a swashbuckling sword. All right, well, I'm going to limit myself to kind of, rapery style weapons and maybe very light armor, but I'm going to take these kind of thiefly abilities here and maybe a bit of magic, or maybe some special kind of extra things from these menus down here. So it was interesting. The best was the cleric's one, because the cleric, you could it was so plastic you could turn it into any other class, which actually showed that they'd done the points right. But again, you could make some things. I want to be like an Anubis priest. So it's like I've got more like the undead will kind of obey me, and so yeah, I'm gonna but I don't really see myself as being that heavy on armor and so on. But spirit of Anubis, arise! Yeah, so you could make characterful characters that were all unique. I liked the idea. It was complex. It didn't really seem to catch on, but a sterling idea. So they brought in tons and tons and tons of extra monsters, tons of extra stuff. By this stage, they're bringing in many different settings. So you've got Dark Suns, you've got Planescape. There was a Hollow Earth one. There's I've got the name of it now. sod it. Yeah, there's a couple of quite strange settings. They've got outer space settings for this. So, and special classes and rules kind of rolling in for this. It was becoming something of a mess of exceptions and rules and so on made for each of these special settings. And now you're having to have definitely house rule about what additional class things or what additional rules you're going to bring in. And the audience was starting to disappear. But meanwhile, what was happening was TSR was going down in flames, absolutely dying due to some terrible business decisions and terrible business management. Wizards of the Coast, and those early guys who ran Wizards of the Coast, I knew them. I was on the test team for Magic: The Gathering, the card game they made, and they turned the whole industry upside down because they made a card game that made so much money they could basically buy the rest of the industry. So what they did was they bought TSR because they're a bunch of fanboys and they thought that was cool. And they decided, let's redo D&D, because now it's a mass of just these rules and addenda to the addenda and additional rules and house rules, and we've got 5 different versions of Bard. Which one are you going to do? And it's very hard to bring new people in because there's too big a mass of rules, and we've lost our old players. They've moved on to other systems, and we're not recruiting new ones. So they decided they're going to do 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. They brought in a design team, kind of new slate. Let's keep iconic things, but let's redo the rules from scratch. This is 3rd ed D&D. Now, you'll also see there is what's called a D&D 3.5, which is sort of an improved 3rd edition. So you'll see D&D 3 or D&D 3.5. Pretty much the same thing. Don't worry about it. What this brought in. Okay, it was actually really exciting. I pretty much ran the world's first campaign of D&D 3.0 because I was writing novels for these guys at the time. They sent me pre-production manuscripts like a year before this thing came out. More than a year, 18 months, 2 years before this thing came out. I get this kind of type manuscript. This is what we're doing. So I ran campaigns of it. But anyway, so it dumps the previous armor style, which was essentially, you had a thing called, it was descending armor class. So the smaller the number of your armor class, the tougher it was. Plate armor is armor class 3. Chainmail armor is armor class 5. So the smaller the number, the tougher it is. What you did is you took 20, subtracted the armor number from it, and that's what you had to roll on a d20. So if I am armor class 2, plate, mail, and shield, and good, well, I subtract 2 from 20 is 18. My flat roll is 18 or higher on a d20 to hit someone in plate, mail, and shield. And I'll get bonuses if I'm a fighter or what have you. These guys just did, all right, let's dump the maths. Let's just say it's ascending armor class. So let's just say armor is going to be recorded as a number, and that's what you've got to roll or higher. So chainmail armor is armor class 15. You've got to roll 15 or higher, which is exactly what you had to roll under the other system. It's just more simply expressed. And no maths involved. Great, fine. And again, a younger audience can access it more easily. They brought in some of the very specialized kind of classes like paladins and druids and so on that in the previous edition you could take them, but only if your characteristics met certain boundaries. They've just brought them in as character classes that you can be. But here's this strange thing. They've said that, okay, as a starting character, you pick a character class, but when you go up a level, you can choose to go up a level in any class you want. They're taking their lead here, their inspiration from computer games, and that started to be online computer games like World of Warcraft and things like that were embryonically starting. So they're kind of copying that style. So I can be a fighter, but if I want some of the thief abilities, I might go up my first 2 levels in fighter, but then when it's time to go up to 3rd level, I might choose to go up 1 in thief because I want some of the sneak abilities that I can use. So that means obviously you get way more variance in characters because they're being built with these different classes as building blocks. You've lost some of the purity of the original game, plus you had to keep a ruthless grip on the narrative of the game, because you've got someone that's just basically a kill, crush, harm, destroy fighter, but then he sees there might be an advantage to being a cleric. Oh, well, the next thing I'm going up a cleric here, but you have to tell me how you did it. where did you go to learn this stuff? You can't just suddenly say, and now I'm level 1 in cleric. You know, you've got to have shown that you have an affinity for this, that you've worked towards this, that you're a pious person in how you've run the character up to this point, that you have contacts with a priesthood that can take you off and, you know, train you and ordain you and so on. You know, there has to be a narrative. Other people, I've noticed, they just didn't. Oh, you want to do this? Fine. You suddenly want to declare you're a paladin? Absolutely. And then it got silly because they did put in prestige classes. Prestige classes, once you got up to a certain level, you're allowed to choose prestige classes, which are hyper-specialized to do things. This guy is a vampire hunter. This guy is a shadow thief. Yes, yesterday you were an ordinary character. Now you've taken a layer of this kind of shadow-based thief, and you've magically got the ability, you can step into any shadow and emerge from any other shadow. Couldn't do it yesterday. No learning process whatsoever, but you can now do it today. Okay, so, you know, this is the conceits of the game. We'll go into some bits, but I have to say, as a game, it started to get a little bit problematic, I found, to run, because for one thing, with these prestige classes and so on, there's usually a character in the party that's hyper-specialized to do things, so it gets a little hard to challenge players, because there's always someone whose entire job is doing this. This guy is hyper-specialized at killing vampires. This guy is hyper-specialized at killing magic users. This person is hyper-specialized at, you know, appearing out of nowhere and stabbing someone in the back. The other thing this thing brought in is feats. So their idea was every time you go up a level, it should be exciting. It should get you something new, because in the other things, yeah, you got extra hit dice and whatever. And if you're a magic user, you maybe got some extra spells, but, you know, it wasn't that exciting. So it's all right. Well, everyone, as you go up, you get things. You'll get bonuses. You'll get abilities. You'll get these things called feats. And a feat was kind of like a skill. There is a skill system in the game, but it's a thing, an ability, and some of these build. So I get a certain feat, such, cleave. I get the ability to, if I've downed an opponent in a melee round and I'm a fighter, I can make a roll against another opponent, provided he's close. There are, as you get more advanced, there are feats that you can get that have other feats as their requirement. Great Cleave. You can only get it if you've got Cleave, but it says, good, you can do this more than once. You can just keep going as long as this guy's in reach. Oh, okay. Oh, so I can bash my way through all those kobolds. Whackety, whackety, smackety, smack. Okay, that'll be exciting. Ah, there's super hyper duper Great Cleave. What? Yes, you can take a 10-foot step between each attack. And there lies the other main difference. Yes, there is a skill system in this, so you could choose skills, which are things which are expressed as a number. You have to roll or higher on a d20 to use them. Sneak, hide, perception, all these sorts of things are now done as a skill. And a rogue, a thiefly character class, its main thing is everyone else gets like 4 or 5 or 6 skills, which is fine, and it gives you a great flavour for each of your things. My magic user is more foresty oriented, so yes, he can survive and find food in the wilderness, and he can sort of hide in the wilderness, but my thief, my guy, he performs music and he can climb and, you know, he can eavesdrop, and this guy is he knows a lot about politics and he's got lots of sort of social contact skills and whatever, you know, so you can make that character virtually into anything. Do you want to be a politician? You want to be an assassin? You want to be a roguish adventurer? You want to be a romancer? You know, you could do it. But the really wacky thing about this was these things kind of got out of hand, but because the feats actually began to really spiral up there and make very problematic power escalation, so that people could start doing some really enormously damaging things, or really strange, just strange abilities that you took off, and the game began to become less heroic. You are ordinary guys who gain experience, become better, and we're starting to verge on the super heroic. You can do these extraordinary weird abilities that accrue and get more spectacular faster. So I have to say, as a game, it was kind of addicting, because you could see these power paths that you could go, and it became addictive. I've got to do this because if I hang out for 2 more levels, and I can get this ability, and that allows me to tree off here and get these, and then I get more and more powerful. You know, you actually became quite intrigued in it. But, you know, It was thoroughly playable. You got very unique characters out of it. It was simple and easy with that unified sort of roll a d20, get this number or higher. But the big difference was suddenly this thing's being played on a map. Now, way back, this game, as I said, came from wargames. So Chainmail had miniatures and they had rules there. If you wanted to run this thing as a skirmish on the tabletop, here's how many inches everything moves. And you can just move, and if you get nose to nose someone, you can hit. But it was done largely theatre of the mind, which is what they recommended, and that's how everything was played. 70s, 80s, 90s. So, most of the history of this game, most of it's in your minds. You got these 5 guys. Oh, these guys are firing their bows. Yeah, these guys are about 200 yards away, and they do have a speed rate which says they can go about 120 yards a turn galloping on their horses. So you get one shot of them out kind of at long range, and then next range you can get a second shot at them, but they'll hit you at the end of that turn. So any that you haven't, managed to knock out of their saddles will attack you. You just needed to do that in your head. But now there is a battle map which is divided into a 10-foot square section of grids, and there are very specific move rules for how many squares you can go. And there are feats and so on that allow you to move in special ways on this. Oh, I can slide diagonally, or I can do a tumble roll and get past this guy's zone of control around him. So I end up behind him now, and I get a big bonus on my hit behind him, and these sorts of things. So it became a skirmish wargame again. It had come full circle. Starts off as a skirmish wargame, becomes this way more theatrical thing, getting more and more about the story, more and more about the characters. But now we're back at the start, where it's a skirmish wargame, and it starts to be more about the battle and the combat and the hurting, and the stories of the characters are starting to be pushed further back. It's gone back to a gamist game. As I said, we'll do a thing later on about different styles. So, version 3.5, all that really did was block a few loopholes. There were some adjustments and so on, but essentially the same game. So, Wizards of the Coast, these guys get bought out, whatever, it gets into the hands of Hasbro. Hasbro decides the way to sell a game is we're going to keep doing new editions. We're going to force you to keep buying new books. Essentially, this is where the money train comes. So, we're going to do a version 4. Haha! Throw out your version 3. Now, version 3, the great enabling thing about it had been they put in this license which said third parties can do content for this. So there's this amazing genesis of people founding whole businesses doing supplements and adventures for D&D 3 and 3.5. So you've got this amazing plethora of books. Here's a whole thing on how to run like samurai characters or Chinese adventurers, or I want to do a thing that's sort of set in the Stone Age, or I want to do a Bronze Age thing, or, lots of specific rules for that, lots of specific settings, lots of adventures, all with their own rules and so on in them. And it was this incredible genesis, and it really helped the indie games industry surge onto its feet, because these were kind of a money spinner for a lot of small companies and got them established. Okay, so when Hasbro decides that's all dead and gone, D&D 3 and 3.5, that actually continues today as Pathfinder. If you've seen a thing called Pathfinder, that's basically D&D 3.5. There's been more development and more iteration in that. But Pathfinder is essentially D&D 3.5 and is pretty much backwards compatible with publications for D&D 3 and 3.5. So if you liked that style and liked those rules, as I said, the characters gaining their powers and could be really addictive, fear not, you can still play it. That's Pathfinder. It's alive and well and happy. But D&D 4th come out. Now the funny thing is, D&D 4th edition, as far as I can tell, has no adherence. People played it because it was the new D&D, but there is now another version of D&D out. No one lingered on D&D 4th and said, this is my one true love. I'm sure there are some somewhere, but it's not really a thing. What did D&D 4th do? D&D 4th drew yet more bloody inspiration from computer games. Now, in computer games, people would, on like big MMOs and so on, people would often sneer at people who were starting off the game as like a fighter character because it didn't have many nuances or weird skills to master. You could just jump in and play it. But so it was like a newbie thing. You sneered at someone because they're too dumb or too bad a player to play something that's going to require some real kind of skill and talent to play. All right, so one thing that drove them was, okay, well, sometimes in original kind of D&D and so on, the magic users are a bit weak, but then later on, they get so many skills that they completely dominate play, and people are sneering at fighters because they say that's for dumb people, and let's make it so that everyone's basically equivalent powers. You pretty much do the same thing, but in different ways. So what they did was they brought in this thing where, first off, they sort of bring in the resource management of the original game is killed. Yes, it's dragged out to a wall somewhere behind the Kremlin, and it's neck shot and thrown into an unmarked grave by the Dnieper. They put in short rest and long rest. Short rest basically kind of regenerates things, brings back hit points, brings back spells that you might have done, and long rests, which is essentially going to sleep for the night, pretty much heals you, cures you. Oh, you were on death's door. You've been taking so many hit points that you were, nigh dead. Yep, not anymore. Sleepy bobos, I'm fine. So there wasn't that kind of careful management of, I've only got this many spells left, I've only got this many hit points, let's maybe withdraw from this situation, retool up, and maybe rethink our way of approaching it. Nah, bugger it, we'll take a smoko and half my hit points are back, and his spells are back, and then we can keep going. So it brought that in, kept some aspects of 3.5, so you could sort of hodgepodge build characters from different levels of different types of character. Obviously kept the ascending armor class and so on. Kept a skill system that are stripped down and simplified, so there's not as many skills anymore. So skills is not as nuanced. Doubled down on the whole board game aspect of the thing, but my personal feeling was it decided to do this egalitarian thing where the characters were doing pretty much the same thing but in different ways. So your characters had set moves, because remember it's a board game. So in each turn that you're taking, you can do you can have some set moves that your character can always do. So a fighter, I can always whack you with my sword, and there'd be a little formula. Good, it's doing the weapon damage plus any bonuses for strength plus any bonuses for magic or anything special equals the damage you do if you make this roll. Okay, if I make my armor class defeating roll. But you also got some special things that you can do like once per encounter. You got some super special things that you can do once some day. And some of these start to get into some real kind of weird superheroic things. So yes, I summon mighty earth spirits and plunge my sword into the ground, and a burst of power comes out and does this damage to everyone around me. Or, I suddenly do a whirlwind attack, whirling round and round, and do this damage to everyone around me. I summon up my mighty spirit and I'll do extra damage to this guy because that's my once a encounter attack, and these built as you got up in levels and got more and more extraordinary and more wacky. But if that's what the fighter's doing, the magic user's kind of doing the same thing. The plethora of kind of interesting spells has kind of been pared down a bit because these are being put in as these abilities to think, oh, I can do like an attack spell which will do this much, or I can whack him with a staff, but once each encounter I can do a more specialized spell. Once each day I get it. So they're kind of sort of dealing, in different ways. The rogue, his special thing was he can try and get behind you and stab you in the back. And so, everyone had the thing they could do each turn, the special thing they could do every now and then, and the super special thing they're going to keep up their sleeve for, when they find the level boss. So it didn't catch on as well. It wasn't as big a success. Now we have D&D version 5, and they're probably going to move on to another one soon. That's been a big hit. They've redesigned it again. So what they've done is doubly redoubled down on making it into a combat board game. D&D version 5 is a combat board game with some role-playing attached. It is not primarily a game of telling stories or really a game about characters. It's a game where characters are actors within a combat board game. Many of the adventures that you see pre-published have elaborate pre-printed boards that you can fold out and play. And, you know, someone's actually worked these out. They're a great little tactical game, and often they're a flow from one combat encounter to another. You have the same thing carried over from version 3 and 4, where you can build characters by taking, as you advance, taking levels from different types of character class. They have massively increased the number of kind of strange, nuanced character classes, so pouring through additional books to find rorty ones that give you extra bonuses is a thing. So when people tell you about their character now, you'll find, oh, I'm a level 3 Griffin cleric and a part-time vulture paladin of NyQuil, and it's like, what? Oh, give me the books. And you'll find, yes, this is something that's given them extra damage under this circumstance, and they've gone through and done the numbers and said, yeah, this is my most advantageous path for the cool combat thing that I've got figured out. All right, you know, rorty gamers will always do this, and this is designed, you know, for that online gaming kind of mentality because they're appealing to a younger audience. And it's worked. They're recruiting younger players because this is what these guys are playing online. But because a role-playing game that's a tabletop role-playing game isn't so constrained by technology, even though a lot of people are playing online D&D, it's still that meeting of the narration and the imagination of the umpire and the interaction of the people so that are playing it. So, you know, it is in many ways way more fun than playing a board game. It's way better than like World of Warcraft, but it does get in the audience of kids that love that sort of thing. So, as I said, you can build your characters from these different levels, but it's way more inspired also by superhero movies. So, gone are the days of shuffling down a corridor in your dented plate armor with your sword in hand, with kind of limited lighting because the guy behind you's got a torch and you're trying to figure out what's down the next corridor. The charm of that is dead. It is gone. It is erased from the game. Also erased from the game is that thing where you are ordinary little guys trying to get ahead in the world, and through perseverance and bravery, you might survive to eventually become a hero. No. You start the game as a hero, kind of, you have powers, you have amazing things you can do that are beyond normal mortal abilities. Everyone can just do amazing stuff. And this builds to superheroic kind of abilities pretty damn quickly. So it is more of a game of superhero style encounter. No, you're not firing your bow and, you know, you haven't got a guy running up to back you up with a mace and shield. No, these guys are channeling powers through the bow that, you know, do extraordinary damage. The cleric is summoning the mighty power of his god and sending out, you know, blazes of light that, you know, burn the unbeliever, etc. So, you know, it is kind of in the theatre of the mind, visually spectacular. It's also designed to sell you an awful lot of props. An awful lot of model buildings if you want to move up from, you know, just having folded out boards, you know, model trees, miniatures and so on. It has been designed to support a industry of accessorizing the game, which includes online tools to accessorize the game. Not only so you can play over the internet with people, so it doesn't have to be face-to-face within a building, but also dice rolling and ways of, if you have people in your house, you know, you can now have systems that project maps, you know, up onto a table, and, you know, there's a whole industry of this. So this is the current iteration of the game. If people say they play D&D now, this is what they're playing. Because if they play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1 or 2, or BX, or even original Dungeons and Dragons, which you sometimes see expressed as Zero Ed, they will say they play OSR, old school rules, which become very distinct from current D&D. And the distinction, the line, I think, is that distinction between the mundane and the superheroic. In OSR rules, you are a kind of a trained but ordinary person who hopes through perseverance and through fate, as it were, to become a hero. In the current iteration, you're a hero who is going to become a superhero. It's a different level of play a different type of story. Also, the old school rules they can use miniatures, they can use maps, they can do all these things. They tend not to, and it tends to be a lot more theatre of the mind and has very little cost to play. D&D 5th is not theatre of the mind. It is a board game, and it requires, at minimum, maps and counters, but the expectation is miniatures, maps, and maybe terrain, and so on. And it is a game that's very specific about movement tactics on a board skirmish war game. So like I said, we did a full circle. D&D 5th is well supported. There's hundreds of settings for it. Some of these settings are kind of interesting. People have done horror and people have done sort of ancient Greek, and you'll find them everywhere because there's still this kind of open source or third-party license which allows third parties to develop settings and additional rules. So, and all the kids play it. So it's easy to find new players for it. It's easy to get parties together. Because it's very rigid about its rules, it's very easy to take characters from a game run by one person and just port them over to a game run by another because it's got very rigid rules. So there's not that much room for interpretation anymore. So one person's going to be running it much the same. Now, a thing I have to say is it's so focused on being a board war game that what it's done is it has shorthanded the role-playing aspect. So you do still have skills. It's a pretty truncated series of skills, but these allow you to do the role-playing part of a role-playing game in a dice roll. A couple of things is there's perception, which just allows you to see, do I see if there's a trap? So no longer do you say, I'm going to search that bookcase and see if there's anything in it. You've come into an area, a perception roll is made, and that tells you whether you saw something or not. And you don't have to specify what it is. So that kind of creative interaction with the environment is gone. But this also goes for, does this guy seem to be shady? There's also I think it's intuition, which is where you just see if someone is shady or hiding something from you. Yes, that guy is a liar. This guy is a secret plotter. Oh, okay. The one that sets me off the worst, the mind control spell, which is persuasion. I just persuade this guard to let me in. You can roll and just persuade. So there's a bit of a culture of, well, I've rolled a 20, so these guys do what I say, or this power is amazing. But essentially, between those rules, it allows you to just kind of shorthand your way through the role-playing end of things. So it's not really a game where you can run an effective whodunit or anything like that, because you've got these skills which just kind of allow you to achieve the kind of things that you get in a whodunit without having to go through the thought process of, we follow this guy with it. Oh no, you did investigate. You made your investigation roll. So yeah, these guys are definitely, hiding something in the cellar. Oh, all right. You don't have to tell me how you went about it. So, that's why there are still adherents to the earlier games. Now, they're going to roll over to yet another version. They're going to do like D&D Next or something. Pretty much their intention for this is they've been trying to see if they can basically get constant money out of you for playing D&D. So make a lot of Dungeons & Dragons a subscription thing. Bring much more of it online onto platforms that Hasbro owns so that you're paying to play, I think, has been going through their mind. But they've seen there's a bit of a strong reaction against this, so they may not do it. On the other hand, that young audience of young gamers are inured to doing micropayments in order to play the computer games. That is a huge part of their gaming experience. So they might not be as enraged at that thought as the older gamers are. So we'll see where D&D Next comes from. But anyway, look, I know this has been an hour, but that is a very simple rundown on the different iterations of Dungeons & Dragons that have been and what they are. Now, Dungeons & Dragons, why still play it? Because this really was the alpha version game. It was like the first role-playing game, and it is flawed and it is smegging stupid in so many ways. The level, the basic core kind of mechanic of you have characters that have strict classes that can do strict things, and that these guys have levels which kind of escalate, and so that if someone has a d8 hit points at first level, and he has 3 d8 hit points at third level, and if a sword does a d8, that means I can stab this guy 3 times at third level and he's fine, whereas I can only stab him once at first level, and as we all know, being stabbed is probably going to make you fall down and drop dead or go to a hospital. But whatever. These have continued all the way through. So why play it when it's that flawed, when there are better systems? And there are systems that are so much better. Please play something other than D&D. But, well, for many people it has a nostalgia value. Obviously, for older people, this is where they started and they want to get back to that nostalgia. In that case, some of them might want to play D&D 5th because that's where you'll find a ready audience. But the nostalgia you're looking for is in the old school rules. Original, BX, and the advanced Dungeons & Dragons rules. That's where you'll find it. So that's why they have adherents. Largely, that's a nostalgia crew. Though, I have seen more and more new players and young players going back to those older systems because in many ways, it's a very different experience. Like I said, you're an ordinary person trying to become a hero, and there's a lot more interplay for personal input as to what your character does, what you do, how you approach the problems. It's way more personally interactive with the umpire, the setting, and the people around you. So that is a strength of old school and why you would do it. Why would you play the new one? Well, as a tactical board game, it obviously has great strengths and is entertaining. People like running around and bashing things. So I guess this is a great combat game, and it's spectacular because your characters have spectacular abilities and do spectacular things, and it's all that high fantasy stuff. So that would be the reason you do that. The reason you would play D&D is because it's popular, it's well known, it's easy to get other players. But there are so many other games. Now, I'm not saying other games are automatically better, but it still remains kind of the alpha game, as in it's still like a thing that has flaws, but we love it almost because of the flaws. They become tropes that we embrace. It can also serve as an entry point because it's known, it's popular, and at the moment it's got a reputation that the cool kids suddenly play D&D. It used to be a thing that nerds did, but geek culture is now cool. So now D&D is cool. So it's easy to get people in to playing, other games by, we'll play some D&D. Now I'm going to scare the crap out of you and show you Call of Cthulhu. Or, now I'm going to show you how to be a bold and mighty knight. We're going to play Pendragon. Or, now we're going to do a samurai thing. Or now we're going to do like a procedural crime thing. Or now we're going to do a cool science fiction thing. So not a bad, entry-level thing for bringing people in. So anyway, look, T-Talk. This was the requested rundown on the editions of D&D and what they mean. What is the difference between them? If you'd ask me my personal preference, I really heartily have not enjoyed the games of 5th that I've played. They were just combat games, and I'm a miniatures wargamer and a board wargamer. Those type of games, I feel, do that better. It's like, but okay, so I don't enjoy that. I will play kind of 3rd edition-y stuff, but I find it difficult. My personal fave is really either kind of advanced D&D, I think, would be my favourite. And I think 1st edition, because it's not bogged down with all of the extra rules, but it has more breadth of material than, say, BX and original D&D, but is perfectly compatible with all my favourite adventures and so on that were written, and it's contiguous with the evolution of that early game. So it's really all just one big happy experience. And there are some rewrites of these rules which make them clearer. Things like swords and wizardry and so on. Labyrinth Lords is a personal favourite. I love Dan Proctor, who did those rules. They were the first rules that kind of did a smooth rewrite of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and BX. So Advanced Labyrinth Lords, if you want the pure D&D experience, that would be my recommendation. If you wanted pure Advanced D&D without the weight of crap to wade through, get the Advanced Labyrinth Lords book. Or my personal favourite is Castles and Crusades, which has a lovely unifying game mechanic which overrides a lot of the niche specific micro rules that were put in Advanced D&D. It's a very smooth, very clean, very beautiful publication, highly recommended, but it's essentially it's essentially Advanced Dungeons and Dragons redesigned with modern design sensibilities. So it has one clear, simple, very beautiful unifying system that unifies things like skills, saving throws, rolls to hit, everything. Okay, so that's good. Another one that I would recommend is I've just done a review of Shadow Dark. Shadow Dark is the other one. It is I've done a review of it. Take a look. I've also done a review, obviously, of Castles and Crusades. Shadow Dark is kind of again, it's a stripped down Advanced D&D that has some good stripped down rules, some great variants in the different character classes, which I really enjoy. Really enjoyed the way they did it. It's got some interesting little conceits in the rules that help you put some stress about resource management and so on in there. So the two I think you should take a look at: Shadow Dark, Castles and Crusades. But if you just want pure AD&D as you remember it, without the often confusing rules, Labyrinth Lords. So that is the Dungeons and Dragons world as stands. Play it, enjoy it for nostalgia's sake, enjoy it for the new adventures you have. Fantasy settings are incredibly easy to make adventures for. Fantasy settings are incredibly easy to make characters for. Fantasy settings are aspirational, which means we wish that we were in them. So the worlds become quite engaging, the characters become quite engaging. That is the ongoing strength of this setting, and D&D is still the go-to sort of thing people think of when they think of those settings. So well worth plunging into a game. If you used to play it, give it a shot again. If you have never played it, go and give it a shot. And if you are still playing it after all these years, mazel tov, babies. Great to meet you, and I hope we get to play again. So anyway, a long and involved tea talk. I'll do some others about specific gaming styles and types, and some other questions that I've had coming in about game design and how to do emotions in games and etc. We'll cover those bit by bit in little tea talks, which will hopefully be way shorter than this one. All right, cheers everybody, bye.